The summer of 1942 was a season of shadows and impossible choices. In the east, the Soviet Union was being torn open by the Wehrmacht, its armies falling back toward the Volga, while Stalin screamed for a second front to relieve the pressure. In London, the British High Command felt the weight of a world expecting a miracle. Winston Churchill knew that a full-scale invasion of the continent was a distant dream, yet the political necessity for action had become an irresistible force. The result was a compromise born of desperation and overconfidence, a plan that would become one of the most scrutinized disasters in military history. The architects of this plan resided within the halls of combined operations, led by the charismatic and ambitious Lord Louis Mountbatten. Mountbatten was a man of the future, obsessed with innovation and the synergy of land, sea, and air forces. He sought a target that was within the protective umbrella of the Royal Air Force's fighter cover, but significant enough to prove that the German Atlantic Wall could be breached. The target chosen was Dieppe, a picturesque resort town on the coast of Normandy, nestled between towering chalk cliffs. It was a choice that looked logical on a map, but ignored the brutal realities of geography and German readiness. Operation Jubilee was not designed to hold territory. It was a reconnaissance in force, a raid intended to seize a major port, destroy coastal defenses, and gather intelligence before withdrawing. But the structural failures began long before the first boot touched the sand. The British military hierarchy was deeply divided over the necessity of heavy naval support. Traditionalists argued for the inclusion of battleships to level the town's defenses, but Mountbatten and his staff feared that a heavy bombardment would turn the streets into impassable rubble, hindering the very tanks they intended to test. They chose the element of surprise over the weight of fire, a gamble that would prove catastrophic. Intelligence was the second pillar of the coming failure. British planners relied on aerial photographs that failed to reveal the true nature of the beach's composition. They saw a wide expanse of shore, but missed the reality of the chert, a specific type of smooth, rounded pebble that covered the Dieppe Island's coastline. These stones were not merely a nuisance, they were a geological death sentence. To a heavy tank, the chert acted like a sea of ball bearings, offering no traction and threatening to foul the intricate mechanics of the tracks. The planners assumed the ground was firm. The men would find it was a trap. As the massive flotilla of over 200 ships slipped out of English ports on the night of August 18th, the air was thick with a nervous energy. Among the nearly 6,000 men, 5,000 were Canadians, members of the 2nd Canadian Infantry Division. These were men who had spent years training in the fog of England, desperate for a chance to prove their mettle. They were told the Germans were unprepared, that the defenses were second-rate, and that the Luftwaffe was a spent force. They were led to believe they were the tip of a spear that would pierce the heart of the Nazi occupation. The first crack in the plan appeared at 3:47 in the morning, while the fleet was still in the darkness of the English Channel. A small group of British landing craft accidentally collided with a German coastal convoy. The ensuing firefight was brief but deafening, lighting up the horizon with tracers and flares. The element of surprise, the very thing the British had sacrificed their heavy guns to preserve, was shattered before a single soldier reached the shore. On the cliffs above Dieppe, the German 302nd Static Infantry Division went to full alert, manning their machine guns and calibrating their mortars. On the eastern flank at a beachhead named Blue, the Royal Regiment of Canada faced the most concentrated horror of the morning. Due to the confusion of the night encounter, their landing was delayed by 20 crucial minutes. When the ramps finally dropped at Puis, the sun was beginning to rise, stripping away the cloak of darkness. The Germans sat in concrete bunkers built directly into the cliffs, looking down the barrels of their MG-42s at a beach that offered absolutely no cover. The Canadians were pinned against a 10-foot seawall, caught in a crossfire so dense that it was described by survivors as a haul of lead. Within minutes, the beach at Puis became a graveyard. Men were mowed down before they could even step off the landing craft. Those who reached the seawall found themselves trapped, unable to retreat and unable to advance. The German gunners didn't even have to move. They simply swept the beach from left to right. Of the 500 men who landed in the first wave at Blue Beach, only a handful would ever return to England. It was a tactical slaughter that highlighted the sheer insanity of attacking a fortified cliffside without heavy fire support. Meanwhile, at the main beach in front of Dieppe, the tragedy took a different form. The Royal Hamilton Light Infantry and the Essex Scottish Regiment hit the shore under a literal storm of mortar fire. Here, the Churchill tanks of the Calgary Regiment were supposed to be the saviors, providing the mobile cover and firepower needed to break into the town. But as the tanks lumbered onto the shore, the nightmare of the chert became a reality. The smooth pebbles slipped deep beneath the tracks, and the heavy machines began to bury themselves in the stones. One by one, the tanks lost their tracks or became high-centered, turning into stationary pillboxes that were quickly picked off by German anti-tank guns. Despite the chaos, the bravery on the main beach was staggering. Soldiers threw themselves against the barbed wire, attempting to blast gaps with Bangalore torpedoes, while snipers fired from the windows of the beachfront hotels. A few small groups actually managed to fight their way into the town, engaging in desperate house-to-house combat, but without the promised tank support and with their radios malfunctioning due to salt water and damage. These units were isolated. They were fighting a private war in the streets of Dieppe, unaware that the rest of the operation was collapsing around them. The only true success of the day occurred on the far flanks, where the British commandos showed the potential of specialized high-intensity raiding. Number 4 Commando, led by the legendary Lord Lovat, landed at Orange Beach with a precision that stood in stark contrast to the main landings. They moved through the woods with silent efficiency, outflanking a massive German battery of 6 150mm guns. In a textbook display of small unit tactics, they destroyed the guns and withdrew with minimal casualties. It was a glimpse of what could have been if the entire operation had been built on stealth and agility, rather than the blunt force of an unsupported frontal assault. High above the carnage, the largest one-day air battle in history was unfolding. The hero RAF had committed over 70 squadrons to protect the fleet, hoping to draw the Luftwaffe into a battle of attrition. The sky was a chaotic tapestry of Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Focke-Wulf 190s. While the RAF succeeded in keeping the German bombers away from the main fleet, the cost was staggering. By the end of the day, the British had lost 106 aircraft compared to the Luftwaffe's 48. It was a Pyrrhic victory in the air that mirrored the desperation on the ground. By mid-morning, the situation at the headquarters ship, HMS Calpe, was one of profound confusion. General Roberts, the commander of the Canadian forces, was receiving fragmented and often incorrect reports. One message suggested that the Essex Scottish had broken through into the town, prompting Roberts to commit his reserve unit, the Les Fusiliers Mont Royal. It was a tragic mistake. These men were sent into a meat grinder that was already overflowing. They landed in the center of the beach only to find that there was no breakthrough, only a landscape of burning tanks and dying men. The order for withdrawal was finally given at 11 a.m., but for many, it was too late. The tide had gone out, leaving a wide expanse of open sand that the soldiers had to cross to reach the returning landing craft. The German gunners, who had been firing for hours, showed no signs of stopping. Men drowned trying to swim to boats that were being blown out of the water. Others stood on the shore, waving white flags made from undershirts, realizing that the only way to survive the day was to surrender. The sea, which had brought them there with such hope, was now a barrier of fire and salt. That Saturday night, when the remnants of the fleet limped back into New Haven and Portsmouth, the scale of the disaster became clear. Of the nearly 5,000 Canadians who had set out, over 3,300 were casualties, including nearly 2,000 taken prisoner. The 2nd Canadian Division had been effectively destroyed in a single morning. The streets of Dieppe were left littered with the debris of a modern army, a propaganda windfall for Joseph Goebbels and the Nazi regime, who used images of the burning Churchill tanks to mock the supposed incompetence of the Allied command. In the aftermath, the recriminations were swift. Mountbatten and the British High Command faced a storm of criticism for the lack of naval support and the rigidity of the plan. Yet, in the cold, analytical language of military history, Dieppe is often described as a necessary evil. The failures of Operation Jubilee became the blueprints for Operation Overlord. The lessons were written in blood. The need for specialized landing craft, the requirement for permanent artificial harbors like the Mulberries, and the absolute necessity of total air and naval supremacy before a single soldier stepped onto a beach. The historical irony of Dieppe is that its failure likely saved tens of thousands of lives on D-Day 2 years later. It shattered the illusion that a port could be taken by a direct frontal assault, leading the Allies to develop the strategy of landing on open beaches. It forced the development of Hobart's funnies, the specialized tanks designed to clear mines and lay bridges. But for the families in Canada, these strategic justifications were cold comfort. For them, Dieppe was not a laboratory for invasion. It was the place where a generation of young men vanished into the smoke of a summer morning. The tragedy of the Dieppe Raid remains a haunting reminder of the friction of war, where the gap between a general's map and a soldier's reality is measured in lives. It was a moment where systemic arrogance met a prepared and ruthless enemy, resulting in a collision that scarred the Canadian national consciousness forever. The pebbles of Dieppe still sit on that shore, washed by the same tides, silent witnesses to the day when the Atlantic Wall proved itself a fortress of rain and fire. History is a cruel teacher, often demanding the ultimate sacrifice in exchange for the most basic of lessons. At Dieppe, the Allied machine learned how to breathe underwater, but only by first nearly drowning in its own mistakes. The men who fell on those stones did not die for a piece of ground, for the ground was lost before the sun had fully risen. They died to provide the data of survival for those who would follow, a grim currency that would eventually buy the freedom of a continent. As the sun sets over the English Channel today, the ghosts of Jubilee still linger in the salt air. They remind us that victory is rarely a straight line, but a jagged path paved with the wreckage of failed ambitions and the courage of those who went anyway. The names carved into the stone memorials at Dieppe are more than a list of the fallen. They are the heavy price of a wisdom that could be gained no other way. In the silence of the cliffs, the echoes of the guns have faded, leaving only the eternal sound of the waves against the chert, a rhythmic pulse of memory for a tragedy that changed the world.
We sailed in the dark with a promise of fire to pierce through the wall and the barbed wire mire. 5,000 Canadians, eager and young, with the songs of the homeland still sweet on our tongue. The planners, they promised the Germans were weak, that the cliffside was soft and the future was bleak. But the maps were all shadows, the photos were blind, and the trap was already firmly defined. At 3 in the morning, the silence was broke by the tracers that turned the gray sky into smoke. The element gone, the surprise led to waste, a tragedy served with a terrible haste. For the stones of pipes, they are slick with the red, a graveyard of iron and a home for the dead. The tanks on the chert, they can't find their way, buried in pebbles on that summer day. Dieppe, you were the lesson we bought with our soul, a debt that the tide can never make whole. The seawall was granite, the bunkers were stone, and the boys of the regiment died all alone. Caught in the crossfire, the wall of the lead, with the sun rising up on a beach of the dead. The Churchill tanks, they are high centered deep in the shingle where promises go to their sleep. The radio's silent, the orders are wrong. We gave up our lives to the end of the song. Lord Love had landed, his mission was true, but the rest of the army was dying in blue. No room for the retreat, no cover from hell, just the sound of the mortar and the funeral bell. We bought them the wisdom with blood on the floor, so they wouldn't make the same mistake in the war. The blueprints were drafted in letters of stain, a victory built on a bedrock of pain. The pebbles are washing, the salt covers all.